Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a mountain of dense information, slice it up, and serve you the most essential, surprising, and often legally challenging insights.
And today, we've got a phenomenal stack of sources.
We really do. And they all point to this massive shift happening right now in the digital economy.
It's that moment, when your personality, your image, your aesthetic, even your whole vibe stops being just personal.
And it starts becoming a commercial asset.
Exactly. We're really wrestling with this question of ownership in, the age of the algorithmic self.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, a really messy legal scramble. Our sources detail how intellectual property law is, trying to chase down influencers who allegedly steal a vibe.
And then you've got contract law, which is enabling these huge production companies to essentially buy out a writer's entire financial future for a lump sum.
And don't even get me started on labor law. It seems to be utterly failing to protect reality TV participants who are selling their deepest vulnerabilities just for a shot at fame.
So our mission today is really to unpack this this rapid and sometimes pretty aggressive propertization of the human experience.
Right.
We're going to look really closely at contractual language, the kind that claims ownership over everything you create in perpetuity and throughout the universe.
That phrase always gets me.
It's wild. And we'll see how those incredibly broad agreements interact with what we think of as basic human rights and, labor protections.
So the big question we're focusing on is just crucial for anyone creating content today. Where do the property rights over a person's commercial identity stop? And where does basic human integrity, fairness, or labor protection actually begin?
Because right now that line isn't just blurry.
No, it's being erased and redrawn daily, sometimes in billion-dollar courtrooms.
And sometimes just in the comments section of a viral post.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with the foundation of it all, this idea of the commercial self. So we're diving straight into the phenomenon of the personal brand. I mean, for millions of people today, their identity, their style, their curated lifestyle, their face, that is their full-time job.
They're monetizing their own taste, their own life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to start with the legal cornerstone here.
The right of publicity.
Right.
Legally speaking, the core mechanism is indeed the right of publicity, or ROP, as it's often called.
And what does that mean in simple terms?
It's an individual's right to control the, quote, commercial display and exploitation of his personality and the exercise of his talents.
So it's about stopping someone from using your name or your face in an ad without your permission.
That's the basic idea, yeah. It's about preventing unauthorized commercial use of your name, your likeness, your voice.
Okay, but that definition sounds very protective of the individual. It sounds almost like an inherent right, like privacy.
It does, but that's the tricky part. Our sources suggest ROP is being treated much more like actual transferable property.
How did that happen? How did we get from a personal right to a sellable asset?
Well, it happened because the main purpose of ROP has always been economic protection, not, say, dignity protection.
Yeah.
And we can trace this this propertization impulse way back to the 1970s with this really foundational case involving Hugo Zecchini,
The human cannonball.
the one and only. Zecchini was a performing artist, and he challenged a local TV station that broadcast his entire act, all 15 seconds of it, without his authorization.
So he was basically arguing, this isn't a privacy issue. You stole my show. You stole my livelihood.
Precisely. His whole legal argument framed it not as a privacy violation, but as an unlawful appropriation of his professional property.
That specific phrase, professional property, seems really important.
It was everything. When the case got to the Supreme Court in '77, the ruling ultimately defined ROP in a way that, aligns perfectly with modern commercial claims. It's the right to control the commercial exploitation of personality and the exercise of talents.
So by focusing on the talent and the commercial value.
The court leaned heavily into the property view. Yeah.
So Zecchini established the core idea. A public performance has a tangible economic property value that can be stolen.
Mm-hmm.
But what really cements ROP as property today, what makes it something you can, put in a will?
It comes down to two traditional characteristics of property law. First, ROP is alienable.
Alienable meaning you can sell it or license it.
You can transfer it, sell it, license it to others, just like a piece of real estate or a patent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the foundation of the entire celebrity endorsement industry.
Okay, and the second characteristic?
And this is where the property analogy really, really crystallizes. ROP is descendable in many U.S. jurisdictions.
Descendable, meaning it survives your death.
Yeah.
Why is that such a critical factor? Why does that make it property instead of just a personal right.
Because inherent rights, like your right to privacy, they generally die with you. Property rights, on the other hand, can be inherited.
Right.
And in about 25 states, including massive commercial hubs like California, New York, and Florida, this post-mortem right of publicity exists. So if a celebrity registers their ROP in those states, their estate can keep controlling and licensing their image for decades after they're gone.
So you're not protecting the dead person's feelings anymore.
No, not at all. You're protecting a financial asset for their heirs.
It just completely reinforces the idea that your public persona is a piece of intellectual property managed by a business, not a personal right that vanishes.
Exactly. And that's why the estates of, say, Marilyn Monroe or Elvis Presley are still so incredibly lucrative.
Okay, so let's move into the really modern, really messy area here. This blurring line between traditional IP, like a copyrighted photo or a trademarked logo, and an overall aesthetic, a vibe.
This is the frontier, for sure. Influencers are constantly told, you have to self-brand, you need a unique, multifaceted identity. But the second they get successful, the human impulse to copy kicks in.
And that leads to what people are now calling vibe theft disputes.
Right, and these emerging legal challenges aren't about someone stealing a single blog post. They're about someone stealing the entire commercial presentation.
And the examples our sources give are just fantastic because they show how this supposedly unique personal brand is. Well, it's actually incredibly formulaic.
Oh, completely. Take the conspiracy.
Yes.
The conspiracy refers to this time when multiple Instagram grids were being scrutinized for being almost ridiculously similar. The visual elements were...
It was a checklist.
Yeah.
The latte, shot from directly above.
Perfectly plated avocado toast.
The hand holding an ice cream cone against a clean background.
And the most important part, an issue of Kinfolk magazine, which represents a very specific aspirational aesthetic, just conspicuously placed on a table.
It's visual homogeneity pretending to be personal taste.
Yeah.
It's a template.
And that template is what makes the commercial aesthetic work, but it also makes it super easy to copy.
Another great example was that Instapede account.
Yeah, that account just compiled endless versions of the exact same travel and fashion tropes. We saw dozens of images of, a person shot from behind wearing a cowboy hat, standing in some epic scenic location.
Or the fall one. The hand holding a single, perfect fall leaf centered against a blurred road.
So predictable.
And you realize just how predictable the whole digital landscape has become. But when that predictability makes someone millions of dollars and someone else copies that aesthetic,
they see it as theft of revenue. Absolutely. And this brings us to the big case in this whole vibe theft discussion, Gifford v. Scheel. This was an influencer suing another influencer for allegedly stealing her image and overall aesthetic.
So the actual photos aren't copied, and the name isn't trademarked. How do you even begin to sue for vibe theft?
Well, Gifford relied heavily on a concept called trade dress.
Okay, we need to unpack that.
Right. So trade dress usually refers to the total image and overall appearance of a product's packaging. Think about the distinctive shape of a Coca-Cola bottle, or the specific blow color and layout of a Tiffany & Co. box.
It's what you recognize immediately, what tells you who made the product.
It's what tells you the source. Precisely. So in the case of an influencer, the argument is that their packaging is their entire curated feed. The consistent color palette, the specific poses, the way they arrange their sponsored posts.
That's fascinating. The argument is that their aesthetic functions as the commercial packaging that distinguishes them from competitors.
That's the argument. And while a lot of IP lawyers looked at Gifford's initial claims, copyright, false endorsement, and thought they were a bit shaky.
The trade dress angle had legs.
It seemed to. The key thing that happened in the Gifford v. Scheel case is that the defendant, Scheel, she ultimately settled. But strategically, she had not tried to get Gifford's trade dress claims dismissed during the process.
Which means those claims were considered viable enough to move forward.
It suggests that courts are at least willing to entertain the idea that an influencer's total commercial look might function as protectable source identification.
Wow. That sets a really powerful, if kind of murky, precedent.
It does, and the defendant, Scheel, she framed the resolution as a win, saying it sets a precedent that young influencers can fight back. The goal for these creators is to establish that their online persona is a definable, legally protected commercial entity.
But if we start granting IP protection to something as vague as an aesthetic or a vibe, doesn't that just chill creativity?
That is the core legal hazard.
How do you create something new if you're constantly worried you're accidentally infringing on someone's protected coffee angle?
You can't. If you try to create some kind of overarching vibe IP, you get these massive chilling effects. Where does it end? Does it cover your filter choice, your hand placement? The sources we looked at really argue that we don't need a new form of IP for this.
So the existing laws should cover it.
Exactly. Most of these disputes, whether they're about trademark, false endorsement, or ROP misappropriation, should be governed by the frameworks we already have.
The personal brand isn't a new kind of IP. It's just the subject that the old IP laws are now fighting over.
That's a great way to put it. The challenge is that people are pouring so much emotional labor, time, and money, it is a full-time job, into building this identity. They believe they own this complex bundle of sticks that includes the aesthetics, the photos, the captions, the vibe itself.
But treating yourself as a property asset means you have to play by the rules of property.
Right, and that includes a really high bar for what counts as legal theft versus just, fair competition.
Which makes sense why, when the legal route is so slow and uncertain, influencers just resort to calling each other out publicly.
It's the industry's self-policing mechanism. They'll reach out privately first. If that doesn't work, it moves to public confrontation very quickly.
Targeted comments, Reddit threads, entire YouTube videos dedicated to shaming the copycat.
It's the modern public version of a cease and desist letter, and it's often much faster and more effective. We saw the example of Via Luong confronting Yui Cha.
And the really public one with Ray William Johnson calling out Mike Fajardo.
Yeah, Johnson accused Fajardo of systematically copying and translating his and other creators' content verbatim. He didn't just sue, he posted the evidence, the DMs, everything. He showed that public pressure is often the weapon of choice here.
So ultimately, the battle over the personal brand is a battle for the commercial self. And once you decide the self is a commodity, the fight shifts from protecting dignity to protecting the balance sheet. Okay, so let's move from the personal brand to more traditional creative work, screenwriting, filmmaking, music. We see similar battles over control, but they're often fought under a very different legal framework.
Right, the concept of moral rights.
Which is an idea that doesn't even come from the U.S. system of property law.
That's a crucial distinction to make. Moral rights, or droit moral as it's known in Europe where it originated, it comes from the theory that an artist expresses their fundamental personality in a work.
So the idea is that the creator can't really be separated from their creation.
That's the philosophical core. It sees art as an expression of personality, not just an economic output.
That sounds much more profound and personal than standard copyright, which is purely about the money. It sounds almost like a human right to protect your own legacy.
It is, philosophically. Moral rights are designed to be independent of the economic copyright, which is the property right you can sell. The idea is you can sell the economic rights, but the moral rights should stick with you.
So what are the key components of these moral rights? What do they actually protect?
There are generally 4 key components. First is the right of attribution.
The right to be credited?
Your right to be credited, yes, but also the flip side, the right to deny credit if the work is changed in a way that you find embarrassing or objectionable.
And the second one, which seems maybe the most contentious now, is the right of integrity.
Absolutely. The right of integrity is the creator's power to make sure the work isn't changed, mutilated, or distorted without their consent. It's all about protecting the original vision.
Okay, what are the other two?
Third is the right of publication, which means the creator decides when, or even if, a work is finished and ready to be shown to the public. You can't be forced to release a draft you think is subpar.
And finally, retraction.
The right to renounce a work and pull it from sale even after it's been published.
Now, in the U.S., the application of these rights is pretty limited, isn't it?
Very restricted. The most prominent piece of legislation we have is the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, or VARO.
And VARO established attribution and integrity rights, but only for works of visual art, paintings, sculptures.
Exactly, which leaves these huge, crucial parts of the creative economy, film, music, literature, mostly unprotected by specific moral rights laws.
I can see immediately why this is so critical in the music industry. Our sources point out how artists are constantly losing control over their vision because of contracts or corporate mergers.
It's a systemic problem. A massive record company merger happens, and suddenly an artist's contract and their entire catalog get transferred to a new company with a totally different standard.
Or through those broad licensing schemes.
Yeah, blanket licenses. Performance rights organizations sell these, and it allows almost anyone to pay a flat annual fee to play songs from an entire catalog.
Which means the artist has zero say in how their song is used.
None. A song that you wrote with deep personal meaning could end up being used for a political rally you despise, or as background music for some ridiculous commercial. Musicians desperately need integrity rights to protect the creation itself, but they've already transferred the economic copyright.
So if these moral rights are philosophically inseparable from the artist, you can't sell them like property. But can you be forced to give them up in a contract?
You can't assign them, meaning you can't transfer ownership of the right itself, but you can absolutely be made to waive them.
And how does that work?
To be effective, a waiver has to be in a signed written document, and it has to specifically identify the work and the exact uses that the waiver applies to. There's a big push in proposed legislation to disallow blanket waivers because they just render the whole right meaningless.
This tension between the artist's integrity and the studio's control, it gets tested most dramatically when a performer is digitally removed or replaced from a project.
Which brings us to the Kevin Spacey case study.
Right.
It's a perfect collision of reputation, contract, and technology. In late 2017, after the sexual misconduct allegations surfaced against Kevin Spacey, the director Ridley Scott made this just unprecedented decision.
To completely recast his role in All the Money in the World with Christopher Plummer.
And reshoot all 400 of Spacey's scenes in just 9 days to make the release date.
I mean, that logistical nightmare just shows the immense power and money a studio can throw around to maintain control.
Yeah.
But what if they hadn't reshot it? What are the technical options for just removing someone now?
Well, beyond just cutting scenes, you have two pretty extreme options. There's sophisticated CGI to subtly alter faces or even create a digital double.
Or the even more advanced stuff?
Yeah, a combination of motion capture and deepfake technology. You can literally graft another actor's head onto the original actor's body, create a whole new performance from different pieces.
Like when they de-aged Jeff Bridges for Tron N Legacy.
Exactly like that. The tech exists to completely erase or change a performance. Which brings up the question, if Spacey had a moral right of integrity, could he have claimed this removal violated it?
It seems like a tough claim to make. If you're being removed because your own reputation is damaged, can you really argue that the removal is what's prejudicial to your reputation?
It's extremely difficult under the current standards. The legal standard for derogatory treatment is an objective prejudice to reputation. When the performer's reputation is the reason the studio is scrambling to get them out of the movie, it's almost impossible to make that claim.
Plus, you can just call it normal editorial practice.
Which is exactly what a studio would do. And nearly all film contracts have waivers that cover editorial decisions anyway.
So let's slip it. What if the studio had insisted on keeping Spacey's performance, and Ridley Scott, the director, objected?
Oh.
Could he have stopped them?
Ironically, probably not, based on a strict reading of the U.S. statute.
Why not?
Because derogatory treatment is defined as any addition to, deletion from, or alteration to the work. If the film was already finished with Spacey in it, releasing it in that form wouldn't count as a subsequent treatment or alteration. The definition is very narrow.
This whole discussion just underlines how absolute and essential contractual control is for the industry.
Which brings us to the chain of title.
A term people outside the industry might not fully appreciate, but it is everything.
It's the foundation. A chain of title is an unbroken series of contracts that proves all the necessary rights. The IP, the moral rights waivers, location clearances, music rights, all of it have been legally transferred to the producer. No gaps, no ambiguities.
And why is that unbroken chain so critical?
For so many reasons. First, financing. Banks hold these rights as security for huge loans. If the chain of title is broken, the money disappears. Instantly.
And certainty.
Absolutely. Producers need a guarantee against anyone cast, crew, even a location owner popping up years later claiming they still own a piece of the rights.
You can't distribute a film without it.
No network, no streaming platform, no theater will touch a film if there's a risk someone might sue or, even worse, try to stop the film from being shown. And you can't get errors and omissions insurance, which protects you from those lawsuits, without a clean chain of title. It is the legal backbone of the whole thing.
And this absolute need for certainty leads to some incredibly overreaching contract language.
It has to be aggressive to eliminate all future risk. Producers use ironclad language to get complete perpetual ownership. Contracts irrevocably assign all rights.
For any programming, publicity, advertising.
In any and all media now known or hereafter devised.
That phrase, hereafter devised. So they own it in physical media, streaming, virtual reality, whatever comes next.
Everything. And for the duration of copyright throughout the universe, and the big one, in perpetuity, it's the industry standard for total control.
And what if the producer breaks the contract? What can the person who granted the rights, the writer, the actor, do about it?
The contract often has a severe limitation of remedies. For example, a location release might state that the property owner is explicitly limited to an action at law for damages.
Meaning you can sue them for money.
But you cannot, under any circumstances, stop the project.
You can't seek to enjoin or restrain the production or exploitation of the picture.
Exactly. The producer is buying certainty and control. And in exchange for participating, you are selling the right to ever fundamentally object to how your contribution is used. Control is the currency.
And this theme of absolute contractual control, it leads directly into the economics of it all, especially with the rise of streaming. The arrival of subscription video on-demand services, Netflix, Amazon Prime, it just fundamentally changed how creative work is paid for. It replaced the system that had been in place for decades.
Right, that's the core tension here, the structural shift in compensation. Traditional broadcast and cable TV ran on a residual model.
So a screenwriter would get paid up front.
A modest fee, yeah. But then they would get ongoing payments
Yeah.
residuals for every single repeat broadcast, for syndication, for foreign sales.
Residuals were basically a career insurance policy, weren't they? They gave you long-term stability.
They worked exactly like a pension plan. If you wrote a hit sitcom in the 90s, those residuals could guarantee you a steady income stream for decades. It provided economic stability in a very unstable career.
It meant the writers shared in the long-term success of their work.
They shared in this success, exactly.
Yeah.
But the SVOD model just changed the whole calculus.
It did. The SVOD model overwhelmingly prefers the buyout model.
So here, the production company buys the original content and all subsequent uses, domestic, international, streaming forever, from the writer for one single lump sum payment.
And once that check clears, that's it. The writer has no more claim on the show's success, no matter how many times it's streamed around the world.
You sell your future financial participation. Now, on the surface, that immediate payment can be huge. For an emerging writer, it can be life-changing.
You can pay off your mortgage.
Right. Sometimes writers get a streamer premium where, say, a 4% share of the net translates to a big lump sum, like £32,000, paid out on day one of filming.
Which sounds incredibly tempting in an industry that's so feast or famine. So what's the downside?
The downside is that it fundamentally shifts all the risk. For a show that flops, a buyout of 125% of your fee is a great deal for you. But our sources, based on industry data, they all suggest that for a successful show, the screenwriter would earn significantly more over time from residuals than from any fixed buyout.
So the buyout caps their upside. It removes their ability to share in the exponential success of their own creation.
Correct. The whole idea of residuals was fair reward. You created the IP, so you should share in its ongoing commercial triumph. The SVOD model gets rid of that completely. All the long-term certainty goes to the distributor.
So why do the streamers prefer buyouts so aggressively? Can't just be about saving money on hit shows.
It's about global financial certainty. These platforms operate on global budgets spanning multiple countries and currencies. They need to know their total content liability up front.
And residuals are unpredictable. They create ongoing financial obligations that are tied to performance for decades.
Exactly. A buyout lets the platform purchase the asset, put it in their library, and accurately budget the total cost of that show for the life of the copyright, whether it becomes the next Squid Game or a one-season flop.
So it's about simplifying their global financial modeling. They prefer predictable, immediate costs over the potential savings of only paying residuals on flops.
Certainty trumps everything. And this power dynamic, it hits certain writers harder than others.
Inexperienced writers.
Inexperienced writers who don't have the bargaining power, who might not even fully understand how residuals work, they're often more financially insecure, so they're far more likely to take that big, immediate payout.
So they get short-term security.
But they sacrifice their long-term financial stability later in their career. It raises huge questions about who can even afford to be a career screenwriter in the future.
Now, how does this economic model, this focus on risk certainty, affect the actual content that the streamers commission? How do they even decide if a show is a success?
Their definition of success is driven entirely by their own secret algorithms and data, and it's way more than just ratings.
Right.
They're analyzing who is watching, when people stop watching, and most critically, whether a show is driving new memberships or reducing churn cancellations in specific parts of the world.
So a show could be a critical darling, loved by all the existing subscribers, but if it doesn't bring in new eyeballs or stop people from canceling...
It's not performing optimally. If you bring in a brand new audience from, say, South Asia or Western Europe, you are a hit show, even if the reviews are just okay.
And a show that's excellent but only watched by existing subscribers is at risk of cancellation.
Because it's not justifying the massive global investment by generating new revenue.
So this algorithmic focus must dictate the kind of content they want.
It absolutely does. It prioritizes content with mass market appeal and returning series that can hook subscribers for the long term. This often means favoring big, global genres action, crime drama, fantasy over more nuanced, specific regional stories.
Like UK-centric analysis or politics.
Yeah. As one writer said, they're not interested in localized stories. Their main concern is securing a returning series to keep people locked in. They do drama to get people to stay.
But there is one interesting upside to the SVOD pitching process, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. The pitching process is described as being much more American. It's direct, it's quick, it's data-driven. A pitch can get a really fast, no, doesn't fit our algorithm.
Which feels brutal, but
the silver lining is huge for the creator. The IP, the intellectual property, comes right back to them almost immediately. It allows them to take their idea somewhere else without getting stuck in a multi-year development hell.
But even with that small upside, the writer is still ultimately surrendering the long-term ownership and financial future of their story for a big short-term fix.
It's the cost of entry into the new marketplace. That surrender of control is the constant.
Okay, now we shift to the final and maybe the most disturbing front in this battle over personal property, reality television. Here, we move from professional writers selling stories to ordinary people selling their lived and often manufactured experiences. This is where contract law collides violently with basic labor and human rights.
The premise of the show Squid Game is a really chilling, if obviously dramatized, analogy for reality TV.
How so?
Well, you have these anonymous VIPs watching strangers subject themselves to extreme physical and emotional harm, all for entertainment and money.
And while reality TV is, non-lethal,
The underlying dynamic is eerily similar. The audience watches real people undergo real damage, often just because they chose to sign on the dotted line for a chance at fame or a cash prize.
and just like in the show, the stakes have to keep getting higher to keep people watching. The next challenge, the next emotional breakdown, it has to one-up the last season.
And this constant escalation puts participants in incredibly vulnerable positions. We see this in the big competition shows like Survivor or Big Brother, where producers have to continuously heighten the risk to maintain interest.
The sources mentioned a specific incident from Survivor where a challenge had to be stopped.
Yeah, the physical dangers got so great that the host, Jeff Probst, had to intervene and stop a challenge to save contestants who were in real distress, possibly drowning in these insane ocean waves while trying to complete a task.
And beyond just the physical dangers of the challenges, there's the psychological harm of the constant surveillance and isolation.
For a really extreme example of that, the show Solitary is a terrifying case study.
I remember that show.
It aired on Fox Reality. Participants were deliberately isolated in these tiny solo pods. Their only interaction was with a robot host named Val, who dictated every single aspect of their lives.
And the challenges weren't physically brutal in the same way?
No, they were things like lying on a bed of nails or eating disgusting food. But the real danger, the profound danger, came from the complete isolation and the total lack of control over their environment.
What did that do to people's mental state?
The sources say that at least once a season, you'd watch players just devolve into insanity. They'd have hallucinations, paranoia, severe psychological distress. They'd end up quitting because they just couldn't maintain their sanity in those pods.
And that shows the acute damage caused by that kind of intentional isolation, all for entertainment. And then beyond extreme competition, you have shows like 90 Day Fiancé, which actually leverage real-life vulnerabilities.
This is a textbook case of vulnerability exploitation. The whole premise leverages the power imbalance of the K-1 fiancé visa process. An immigrant participant uproots their entire life, leaves their job, their family, their support system.
And they risk it all on a relationship where their U.S. partner literally holds the key to their legal future.
The U.S. partner has all the power, and the show exploits that asymmetry for drama. They actively seek out couples that exaggerate this dynamic. We see U.S. partners weaponizing the immigration process, threatening deportation.
Like Danielle Mullins chasing down Mohammed Jabali.
Or Colt Johnson, having his partner Larissa Lima arrested multiple times right before their wedding, knowing it could jeopardize her immigration status. The relationship itself becomes a tool for control and conflict. It's ratings gold.
And the network itself often participates in vilifying the more vulnerable person.
Absolutely. The network sometimes frames the immigrant participant as being manipulative, as only being in it for the green card, regardless of the actual complexity of the relationship. It's exploitation from all sides, the partner, the producers, the network, all, to heighten the drama.
And then we get to maybe the most egregious exploitation our sources detail, which involves children.
Toddlers and tiaras.
Right. The show generated just massive public controversy because of the methods parents were using to prepare these very young children for pageants.
The details are just shocking because we're talking about infants and toddlers. Parents were giving kids go-go juice or pageant crack energy drinks before they went on stage.
They were bleaching their teeth, waxing eyebrows on 5-year-olds,
Applying heavy spray tans to 2-year-olds, full makeup on 1-year-olds.
and the routines themselves often had this disturbing adult content.
Right. A 4-year-old dressed as Dolly Parton with fake breasts and butt implants. A 3-year-old doing an overly sexualized adult dance routine. And crucially, the sources say the producers intentionally sought out the crazies first, the families they knew would create the most controversy, and sometimes even staged local competitions just to facilitate filming.
It was systematic exploitation for ratings at the expense of child welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So when the exploitation is this extreme, the legal system sometimes tries to fight back using the doctrine of unconscionability. How do courts decide if a reality TV contract crosses that line?
Unconscionability is a really high bar to clear. To invalidate a contract, most places require you to show both procedural and substantive unconscionability.
So you have to prove the process was unfair and that the terms themselves are excessively harsh.
Both.
Okay, let's start with procedural, the bargaining process. What makes these contracts procedurally unfair?
Well, first, they're almost always adhesion contracts. They're take it or leave it, there's no negotiation. That immediately creates a coercive environment for people who are desperate for fame or money.
And second, producers allegedly target people who are more vulnerable or lack legal experience.
And then they flood the contract with long, complex legalese that's deliberately hard to understand.
Using the technical language to hide how harsh the terms really are.
Exactly. And third, the whole environment of the show, the isolation, the secrecy, the pressure not to be replaced, it all discourages participants from getting outside legal help. So challenging that oppression branch of the process is a major focus for anyone fighting these agreements.
Okay, so once you get past the process, you look at the terms themselves, substantive unconscionability. What are the most egregious terms people are agreeing to?
The clauses are just staggeringly broad. First and most important are the sweeping liability waivers.
The ones where you waive liability for
Everything. Almost everything. Physical injury, mental anguish, defamation, emotional distress, intentional harm, disease, even harm done to you by another participant.
You literally sign away the right to hold anyone accountable for your safety and well-being.
Effectively, yes. Second, they severely limit your remedies. Participants often waive their right to sue in court, forcing them into private arbitration. And they limit damages strictly to actual monetary damages.
So no punitive damages and critically no injunctive relief. You can't stop them from airing the footage.
Correct. And to keep all of this quiet, they use these massive penalty clauses.
Liquidated damages.
Yes, to enforce incredibly restrictive NDAs. If you violate the NDA and speak out, you face financial ruin, hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties. And on top of all that, most participants, besides the big stars, get either low pay or often no pay at all.
Which has naturally led to this critical labor debate. Are these people employees or are they independent contractors?
That classification is the linchpin of the whole system. Being labeled an independent contractor exempts you from almost all federal employment laws, crucially including the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA.
Which means as contractors, they can't form or join a union.
Exactly. It strips them of any collective bargaining power against these massive consolidated networks. They're forced to negotiate one-on-one.
But that landscape is finally starting to change.
It is. The NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is actively revisiting the legal test used to classify independent contractors. It's part of a national push to redraw those boundaries, recognizing how much control these companies actually have over the work.
And this isn't just an American issue.
No, it's global.
Yeah.
Our sources note that France, for example, already considers reality TV participants to be full employees. If participants here were reclassified as employees, they'd gain the ability to bargain collaboratively for minimum standards for working conditions, psychological care, and pay.
So given all this, let's look at the regulatory environment in California, which is often leading the charge on worker protections. What are policymakers doing to try and catch up?
California's legislative actions, the
Well,
ones coming into effect in 2025 and 2026, they really highlight the systemic attempt to better define and protect vulnerable workers, many of whom might otherwise be misclassified. It's policy trying to catch up to reality.
like the new laws around pay transparency and just knowing your rights.
Exactly. Take the Workplace Know Your Rights Act, SB 294. Starting in early 2026, employers have to provide a standalone written notice covering a whole list of critical protections, including the rules against misclassifying independent contractors, union rights, workers' comp, heat illness prevention.
The goal is to make sure every worker, even if they're labeled a contractor, knows their basic protections.
Right. And then you have the effort to combat more subtle forms of discrimination with SB 1137.
This is the one that recognizes intersectionality.
Yes, under the state's Fair Employment and Housing Act. This is the understanding that discrimination might not be based on just one thing, but on the combination of two or more like gender, national origin, and disability status combined. It forces companies to be more aware of how these overlapping traits can lead to a higher risk of discrimination.
So these laws are all part of a broader effort to catch up to the reality of modern, often precarious labor.
Whether it's an app-based gig worker or a reality TV participant, the common thread is the need to formalize classification and protection. And that brings us right back to the fundamental issue of control.
Wow. We have covered an enormous amount of territory today, from, vibe theft to the economics of streaming and the fundamental question of worker rights and reality TV.
Sure.
What's the core synthesis here? What's the one thread that ties it all together?
The single underlying theme that connects every single section is this relentless systemic demand for control. Whether you are a creative selling a story, a screenwriter selling a script, or a participant selling an experience, the contracts and the legal battles are all designed to strip away your future right to object to how your output is used.
These legal battles are all happening at this really volatile intersection of personality, property, and labor.
And they're demanding better solutions than just blanket waivers and restrictive clauses that limit your remedies to only financial damages.
It's like the moment you create something commercially viable, a photo, a song, a raw life story, the legal and economic system just tries to turn it into this sterile asset that can be owned and exploited completely independently of you.
And that leads directly into the next and incredibly complex layer of this ownership conflict, artificial intelligence. Studios are increasingly moving toward training their generative AI systems only on content they legally own, IP-protected models.
Why? Why is that so important to them?
Because if you feed your archive into a publicly accessible AI, you risk losing control of that material. You dilute its value.
So owning the underlying data set to train the next generation of creative tools. That's the ultimate power move. It's the new gold rush.
It is. This means the most valuable asset you have might not be the finished product anymore, the story, the film, but the underlying archive that you use to train and protect that IP.
So your raw photos, your documents, your notes, your home movies.
That archive is now seen as the exclusive fuel for future IP-protected AI models, which just underscores this vital need for meticulous documentation and aggressive ownership of your own source material.
So whether you're a major studio or just a journalist with years of research notes, that underlying archive is where the long-term, future-facing value is.
The ownership of that raw underlying truth is the new center of gravity in storytelling. And if the law struggles so fundamentally to protect the artistic integrity of a professional artist's work, as we saw with the narrow scope of moral rights,
Or the basic welfare of a deeply vulnerable reality TV participant.
it raises this profound final question for everyone listening.
Which is,
If the law can't adequately protect them, what are you giving away every time you scroll past the terms and conditions box and just click, I agree? What are you letting platforms and corporations do to monetize your personal identity or creative output? The terms you accept today might be signing away the very archive that makes you valuable tomorrow.
that is certainly food for thought. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly complex and often disturbing legal landscape today.
My pleasure.
That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.